Okay, welcome everyone. June, could you share the slide deck? Thank you. So welcome everyone. Today is the first meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee's Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee. Today is Monday, November 13th, and we'll be here from 11:30 to 1 o'clock. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Since we don't yet have subcommittee co-chairs, staff is going to facilitate this meeting. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to take a moment to go over some meeting logistics before we get started. This meeting is being live streamed onto YouTube, and later a copy of the recording will be posted on the city's transition webpage under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. Committee members, please take a moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks listening in can follow along. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. Community members who are listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit questions or comments through there. We may not answer all the questions during the meeting, but the Q&A also becomes part of the public record. At today's meeting, we will not be taking verbal public comment, but folks can provide public comment at any time through our comment form online on our website or by emailing transition@portlandoregon.gov. Oh, also by calling 311, I should say. And folks can sign up to give verbal public comment at our next full committee meeting, which is this Wednesday, November 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. Next slide, please. So we're going to spend the first 15 minutes or so on subcommittee business, and then we will review the draft subcommittee overview document. After that, staff is going to provide an overview of decisions or kind of proposed decisions that have been made that are relevant to this subcommittee's work and share progress on the subcommittee's charge. And then we're going to spend a fair amount of time kind of agreeing to next steps, what folks want to do after this meeting before the subcommittee meets again. Next slide, please. Destiny and Joe are unable to join us today. Otherwise, I do expect full subcommittee attendance, and I'll show you who those folks are in a sec. And we just have a couple items. We're going to review who is on this subcommittee, hear from folks about why they want to serve, and then preview the first co-chair rotation for the subcommittee. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, the Government Transition Advisory Committee voted to create two subcommittees, this one on districts and council operations, and another on voter and candidate education and outreach. 9 of our committee members have chosen to serve on this committee and 11 on the other. And I mean, as we kind of begin this work, we just wanted to take an opportunity to kind of do a round robin and hear from folks about why you're choosing to spend your time on this subcommittee. And I think it'll just help us on the transition team make sure that we are meeting the needs of the group. So I'm going to go switch it up and do some reverse alphabetical order. So Zach is not always last, and maybe invite Zach if you're willing to share some thoughts, and then we'll hear from Terry.
Thanks, Julia. This is Zach Curl, EHAM. Appreciate being able to go first. I realize it's a direct response to my last comment at our other subcommittee. I'm here having previously served for an elected within city council, and I think there's a pretty genuine interest in how council will operate in the future, and I'm interested in both helping drive that and direct that towards a more thoughtful and geographically inclusive way of incorporating subcommittees and the like, but also one that effectively takes in public interest and public comment.
Thanks, Zach. And Juanita, I see your chat. Could other folks hear Zach? I can, so I'm not sure. Are you hearing any audio?
I could hear a little bit of him, but not like I hear you and Terry. And Jim.
Okay. Yeah, Zach, can you maybe see if there's anything you can do and I'll come back to you? Thank you. Terry, why don't you go ahead and go, and then we'll hear from Leah.
Okay. Well, let's see. What am I interested in? Why am I doing this? I think partly because it's of interest of mine, just generally legislative procedure is a hobby, and everyone needs a hobby, and that one's one. But also a little bit that, the Charter Commission thought that they wanted to empower a legislative council to do policy for the city, and I agree that that's a good thing. But I'm worried that as the transition is developing, that there's no constituency for supporting council organization other than the transition itself. And I worry that we won't end up with a strong council that the Charter Commission intended. So that's what I'm here for.
Thanks, Terry. Leo, why don't you go, and then Zach, maybe we could try you again. Okay, thanks.
Hey, friends. Terry, I love your hobbies. That's great. I decided to be on this subcommittee because as I've been doing engagement through GTAC and just in my general life about the transition, one thing that continues to come up time and again is people wondering how their district-specific representatives will serve them, how they engage with them to, get their needs met, and how they'll be able to interact with them on council as a whole. And so I'm curious to dive into that a little bit more, both from an engagement perspective to get input from people outside of this room, as it were, and to do whatever we can to help clarify answers. So thank you. Glad to be here with y'all.
Thanks, Leah. Zach, can we go back to you?
Yeah. Can you hear me better now? I'm seeing a lot of shaking of heads. Okay. Sorry about that. It's the issue of going back and forth between different video meeting apps. I was saying that I, having worked for a city elected official and in City Hall, I have a personal interest in this, the topic of this subcommittee thinking about council operations and ensuring that there is a effective channel in which public comment and public policy is developed and reflected in policymaking by our council members. Thanks.
Thank you, Zach. Juliet, and then Juanita.
Hang on, I'm just going to change my view so I can see everybody I can for some reason right now. So I'll worry about that in a minute. So my interest is partly in the district offices, which at the beginning kind of wasn't even on the table and seemed like it was a bit of an afterthought. It kind of lurched forward with the help of Commissioner Ryan's office, but I think just because of my history and relationships in neighborhoods, that it's kind of in my wheelhouse to follow through on that and make sure that the offices are going to increase connections from counselors to the community, increase equity, and but in a fiscally responsible way. The other part is that I am concerned about the council meetings with the larger council and just making sure that the mechanics of that are as smooth and efficient as possible. And I actually looked at some comps in other cities of their rules, and I watched a couple of meetings of larger cities, and so I can talk about that more a little later. So those are the two reasons that I signed up.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Juanita and then Jose. Juanita, you're muted.
Yeah, I think that some of the reasons why I wanted to join this committee have already been mentioned, but I think that the main thing that I am interested in is on the operations with the new districts and the district office, and then how that is going to function with the council when they meet. And then I want to make sure that that process is very clearly delineated. And also the accessibility to the public, although we all recognize that with the districts and the offices being in the districts, that is going to definitely improve. But I think it's important to have a framework as to how that is going to work. So that's basically why I'm here. And thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks, Juanita. Jose and then Amy.
Hello. Yeah, similar to a lot of things, what Leah said is especially true for me, where every question I've had and I've heard others have seem to fall within something that would be tackled by this committee. So I thought it'd be important to be here. But also I saw a lot of value in the questions we asked really early in the process, that were maybe not shut down, but punted, and then came up again recently at the city council elections and city council work session. The same questions we asked months ago of facilities and things like that. So I do see a value in us discussing it as a very wide array of citizens with different views, and bringing some of these things to attention is what we think about the process, because I think that we have a good insight into what's the public is going to think.
Thank you, Jose. Amy, and then Lori, I know you're here, but maybe not on the fence about joining this committee, but if I'll invite after Amy goes, if you want to share anything, I welcome that, but no pressure if you don't want to. Amy.
Yeah, I echo a lot of the sentiments that were said before. I too have a professional background in legislative politics and have worked in situations with larger councils. And so just professionally, I'm professionally and personally interested. It's kind of a hobby also for me. And then this committee specifically, it seemed like a place for meaningful contribution. I think we've all on the committee been hungry for places where we can meaningfully contribute to the transition process and really offer expertise and thoughtful reflection and investment of time and thoughtful resource to the staff who's working really hard. So just kind of here to hopefully be helpful to the transition and the council and do a little part in making this a little bit better of a transition.
Thank you, Amy. Lori?
Yeah, so I don't have any particular expertise or experience in either of the subcommittee topics, but I'm really interested in both of them. And in particular, this one, similar to what Jose and Leah said, I've gotten lots of questions in both areas of both district and council operations. So for me, I learn the best if I can, hear all the details, and I didn't want to just wait for the overviews in the GTAC meeting. So I didn't think I needed to be a voting member because, like I said, I don't have a lot of experience in this area, but I did want the education. So I plan to attend all the meetings that I can.
Thank you so much, Lori. And I appreciate everyone sharing. This is probably a summary of information that we'll look at when we create subcommittee agendas with the chairs when we get some. And just help us ensure that we are creating subcommittee agendas that are responsive to the interest areas of the members. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. And as I was just kind of mentioning, co-chairs. So in a minute, we're going to talk through the draft subcommittee overview document that we circulated last week. But that overview proposes co-chairs with a set of responsibilities, which are to provide leadership for the subcommittee, facilitate meetings, lead discussions, keep the subcommittee on time and task, collaborate with staff on setting the meeting agendas, and encouraging consensus decision-making. So when we surveyed committee members to assess people's interest in joining one or both of these subcommittees, we also asked if folks had interest in serving as a co-chair. And there were 5 folks who indicated interest in chairing this subcommittee. I know that doesn't mean those 5 people have committed to it. I appreciate that, and that other folks who maybe didn't indicate that may also be interested. I think from a staff perspective, we would recommend rotating co-chairs so that folks who are interested in serving have the opportunity to do so. I don't think that we need to decide now the frequency of that rotation. If folks, I don't think it's necessary, we could talk about it, but instead sort of have a couple of folks willing to serve now, rotate when it feels like the time is right and the group agrees to that. So I would really like us to have co-chairs appointed at the next meeting of this subcommittee. I will say, as the staff person, I like to have co-chairs to work with and help create the agendas. So I would just ask if folks can to please let me know as soon as possible if you're willing to serve in this first rotation. It can be you with somebody else, so you don't have to do it alone. And just remember that we're also looking at this same time period for our next rotation of co-chairs for the full committee and our first rotation of co-chairs for the voter education subcommittee, because I know some of you serve on both. So if this is like, this would be your preference, if you can please let me know. And if you have any questions or just want to chat with me about it, please reach out. Any questions, comments about any of that before we move on? Okay. I appreciate in advance people volunteering. I was gonna say. Okay. So the next step is for us to review and hopefully agree to a draft subcommittee overview. This is the 3-page-ish. Oh, I'm sorry, June, could you move to the next slide? This is the little bit less than 3-page document we sent out last week. It's also posted on the website. In a minute, I'm going to drop a link into the chat for folks. This document is to ensure that we're kind of all on the same page about what this subcommittee is about and how it's going to function. Ultimately, what we want to leave with today is you all agreeing to a proposed overview of your work, and then it would go to the full committee for their review and approval at the December 5th full committee meeting. So next slide, please. So this is just the components that are in the overview document. It has a background and purpose, the subcommittee's charge, a proposed timeline and scope of work, membership, meeting frequency, voting and decision-making, working agreements, which are the same as the full committee working agreements, some additional roles and responsibilities. This is where it talks about the chairs and accountability. So I am not going to review this document with you right now. I don't think that's probably the best use of our time. So what I'm going to do is pause for 5 minutes and ask that you review it. Maybe that's for the first time, but hopefully it's just a reminder. And then after 5 minutes, we will come back and take any questions or proposed revisions. If you can't find it, I will drop a link into the chat in a minute. Okay.
So we're reviewing this, Julia, not the slide itself, right? This thing.
I can't see that, Juliet, but if it says subcommittee overview on it, that is
okay.
correct.
Okay.
Apologize. Juliet, you might want to mute yourself. We're just getting some feedback. Okay, folks, is that enough time for people? Seeing some head nods. Okay, thank you. I thought it might be easier than kind of us reading it together. So yeah, I'll take any kind of questions about the content or proposed revisions. And I know also Joe sent a couple comments that June or I will bring into the room as well. Jose and then Leah.
Yes, I brought this up at the last committee meeting. I think we discussed voting. It says only committee members may vote. And we talked about changing that to subcommittee members may vote.
Yeah, so for folks who weren't at the voter and candidate education and outreach subcommittee meeting, there was the same, I think maybe the language in the overview document is unclear. I think it says committee members may vote. It was meant to be the members of the committee who serve on the subcommittee. So I would recommend that we make that same change that the other subcommittee made. Thanks, Jose. Leah.
Thank you. My question is about on page 1 under timeline and scope of work. I think this all looks great, but one thing that I don't see reflected in there is talk about the districts and offices. And since facilities have been such a question for folks on this committee and outside of it, I'm wondering if there's a way that that works in the timeline. Like if there are existing conversations that, I don't know, that we should consider in terms of putting it in there or where it could fit.
I'm sorry, Leah. You were saying that it's in the charge, but doesn't show up specifically in the timeline.
In the timeline, so specifically 1, council operations, and 3, onboarding of new council members are reflected in the timeline in terms of there being recommendations. So April to May 2024, final onboarding recommendations, and then September 2024, finalized council operations recommendations. But there's no mention of districts or offices in recommendations in the timeline.
Tate or Diana, maybe correct me if what I'm about to say is, or Tate, it looks like maybe you want to take a stab, or I
Yeah,
can.
sure. No, hi everyone. Tate White, pronouns are she, they, strategic project manager with the transition team. It's a great comment, Leah. Great that you noticed that. I think the facilities conversation it's very current, and there's a lot we're still trying to nail down about that. So I think that's why you're not seeing it reflected here, but there should be a council meeting upcoming within the next month where they talk about that a little more, and we might be a bit clearer on that timeline and how it can fit into this. So Julia, I don't know what that means for finalizing this document in terms of timing, but
I would recommend, Leah, if this is responsive, that we add kind of a sentence or an asterisk after the timeline bullets that basically says what Tate just said. Like, honestly, a timeline at this point would be premature, but we can probably come back and add the timeline for the facilities, maybe even as early as our next subcommittee meeting.
That makes total sense to me. I just want to make sure it's reflected in the scope of work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Terry.
Yes, my question was maybe just more general than Leah's, and how the timeline and scope here fits with the work plan that the full GTAC just adopted, and understanding that both are probably going to evolve a little bit. I just want to probably allow for that, and think about that some as we start our work. Some recommendations might come sooner than others. Others might be more complicated than others, and we might find other things to give recommendations on. So my suggestion would be to somehow loosen that, or at least recognize that it's a work in progress that we're allowed to revisit as needed. So that was one thing. The other thing is alternates should get the vote on subcommittees. That's my recommendation for that. And I forgot to mention it in the other committee, but I abstain from the working agreements. So that's my input.
All right, let me make sure I understand your first point. And June, I don't know if you could go to slide 9, but in the articulation of the subcommittee charge, at the bottom, it says, with the full committee's approval, the subcommittee may choose to address additional topics, so that we aren't saying for sure, like we know exactly right now, everything that the subcommittee may choose to take on. If that is not kind of what you're looking for, are you proposing we actually revise something, or are you just sharing the reflection that?
I guess that's okay. I mean, that's in the charge, but it's not in the timeline, and the timeline is maybe more specific than it needs to be at this point. Is maybe all I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know if Tate or Diana, you want to weigh in. I think there's some flexibility in the language. And actually, June, if you want to just go one more slide forward, is the timeline. I guess maybe I read these as like not later than in some instances, right? Like at some point, like we can't be making recommendations on how the council is going to operate, you know, in March of 2025 or something. So I think it was this idea of trying to keep, to ensure that the work is done in a timely manner for council and for staff to do what they need to do. But let me move. Can I? Yeah, okay. Can I take the second one though? I don't want to lose Terry's alternates voting on the subcommittee. I saw a head nod, but well, I'm sorry. Maybe I'll take Amy, Juliet, and Juanita. And then if anyone wants to speak to the alternates voting, we can come back to that if that's okay, Terry. Amy, go ahead.
Well, just because it's fresh in my brain, I completely support alternates voting on subcommittees. If people are taking the time to serve on the subcommittee, they should certainly get a vote. And then so my question's around kind of like jurisdiction in developing these things. Like, so we can make recommendations, but it's played out like we aren't totally sure who that connective tissue is. And so I know that this is probably developing over time, but it might be worth us as a subcommittee kind of codifying, like we will deliver to the potential council president, we will deliver to all the chiefs of staff, or just really getting granular about exactly who we're passing off this information to. Because when I think about these like the future like recommendations and that kind of thing, it would matter a lot who our audience is and what jurisdiction we actually have to make those recommendations. So just thinking about that. And then when we think about the onboarding for new council members, I'm curious if there's vision around whether we would be involved in that, or this is like programming we would write and hand it off. And just kind of like on a granular level, like, does the staff want us to say like, we think XYZ topics are like what should be onboarded, or it would be helpful if we supported the onboarding, or like on a pretty granular level, are we supporting like the intellectual like backbone of this, or are we supporting like actually helping create some of these resources? Which I would advocate us actually helping create some of the resources. There's a lot of writing and programming powers on this group. And I think that wouldn't be crazy for us to try to like aim to do. But I just think if we develop more clarity over time, that would probably be a good thing.
Thank you, Amy. Juliet? No? Oh,
Yes, I'm here. I feel funny because I can only see one of you, but I have written all over this thing. I had a lot of different thoughts. One thing I didn't see in here, and I should have thought of it for the broader GTAC, but is something about fiscal responsibility, because there are potentially, cost overruns with anything that's bricks and mortar. I'm also concerned, and I heard this at one of the hearings, someone who testified, or it was work session. No, it wouldn't have been testimony. It was a council meeting, just talking about how long are these meetings going to run with such an expanded council. And I feel less worried about that now after watching some in other cities, although they didn't seem like they had anything on their agenda that was involving a lot of deliberation. But I still think the more proactive we can be about getting ahead of the mechanics of running a meeting with 12 or 13 people is important. So I would like to see the words fiscal responsibility or consciousness in there somewhere. And it is alluded to, but I think for these two particular things, the bricks and mortar and the expanded council, it's worth stating it. And then under onboarding, I think there should be more under there. I'm curious how it's done now. And I think kind of going to what Amy was saying, 3 items that I wrote down that I would think a new council would need to, be aware of is optimizing meeting time, minimizing turnover of staff at City Hall, because this is something that has concerned me the whole time, and change management, which kind of goes with the previous one. And I do support subcommittee member alternates voting. So I'll stop with that. Am I confusing you, Julia?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you're further down the road than I am, or that maybe
probably.
where we are. But let me check, because I think really good, interesting points that would come into our conversation once we start doing the work. Are you proposing we make changes to that couple-page document that explains the subcommittee's work? And if so, could you maybe be like, I might need a little bit more specificity.
I guess the only thing I would add to our charge is fiscal responsibility, or fiscal, I don't know what the right term for it is, fiscal, fiscal responsibility. And I'm not sure where you would put that in, because I don't want to go back and change the GTAX working agreements. So I'm not sure how you bake that in, but I
got it.
Yeah, fiscal stewardship, that's good, Amy. Because we're not making the decisions, but I think that with this group we can be proactive about the budget.
Okay. Thank you. I think I have a way we could do that.
Okay.
So we are a little bit over time, and I do want to make sure we get to substance, kind of the work, but I'm happy to take, let's take more. Juanita, go ahead. I think it was Leah. If you want to go, please do. And then staff need to share some thoughts from Joe.
Okay.
Juanita.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that in terms of the timeline and scope of work, although it's very general, I think that actually is good for us, because we can, as we move forward and we start the work, we can be more specific about more timelines. However, I think the only thing I would like to recommend is in the last line, September 2024 finalized council operations requirements. I think it needs to make sure that we include not only the council, but also the district operations. It needs to be something that is more comprehensive in that sense. So we're working with both districts and council operations. So it needs to reflect that in the timeline and scope of work. And maybe in the last one, all you need to do is finalize council and district operations recommendations. That would be, you just add that to to those bullets.
I'm sorry, Juanita, do you mean district offices?
Well, yeah, well, what we're looking here is what we have is districts and council subcommittee operations. So my assumption is that we're going to be involved in how those district offices work, that there's an infrastructure to them, the way they operate. Am I wrong?
No, I'm just
assuming too much.
no, I don't think it's wrong at all. I mean, I personally think council operations includes how districts function. And then
I see.
as we talked about before, we will add the timelines around district offices, the facilities portion of it, as soon as we're able to do that.
No, I'm not referring to the buildings themselves or anything.
Gotcha.
I'm talking about the structure, the organizational structure, and how do they operate.
Got it. Leah, did you want to go, or are you okay?
I'm good. Thank you, though.
Okay. Bear with me for a second. Joe I'm sorry, Jose.
I just want to say something really quick that I think might be important in regards to alternates voting, which I support. One is that it was discussed at the last meeting that they could vote because nothing we pass here isn't going to go to the main committee and get a full vote anyway. So their vote doesn't affect it. But we did have a staff member mention that they might have to check our charter or something to make sure that's allowed. So I just wanted to make sure those things got said.
Thank you. I feel pretty confident that there's no, what am I saying? I was going to say misalignment. The bylaws don't speak to it, so I think we're okay if that's what this group chooses. So really quick, if I can bring Joe's thoughts, and then I do want to move us, see if I can share back what I hear are the agreed upon changes and then move us on. So Joe has 2 points. The first one, if we can go one slide back, June, is under onboarding. One topic under onboarding is roles of mayor, council, and auditor. I suggest that the clear articulation of these rules be explicitly in our charge. And then the second one is the work plan says that onboarding will be done in work sessions. This implies that there will be no training before the new counselors are sworn in. I suggest that we work with staff to design training that happens in December to include legal considerations, role clarifications, and the basics of council operations. That I think is, I'll just speak to that because that is not what sub-bullet A under 3 means. It didn't mean to be that is the only way that onboarding happens. We just wanted to really be clear that we're looking for this subcommittee's advice on potential initial topics for work sessions that would happen in a public space. But Tate or Diana, correct me, the idea is not that there would be no onboarding for counselors before they start on January 1st.
Yes, Julia, thank you. That is correct. And we can have a broader conversation about onboarding in the next section. And I can address some of the other comments and clarify some of that confusion, but maybe I'll just hold off to the next section so we can keep moving.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you. And again, this is, a draft. We want to end up with a draft that this subcommittee feels like they could share with the full committee. Ultimately, the full committee approves a subcommittee's overview, if that makes sense. So I'm hearing maybe 4 revisions. So clarifying that subcommittee members vote. So committee members that are not on the subcommittee don't vote at the subcommittee. 2 alternates who are on the subcommittee can vote on the subcommittee. 3, adding a sentence on the timeline about bringing back into it the facilities timeline when it's available. And 4, I think if folks will let me, we could add fiscal responsibility or stewardship into kind of the first sentence of this subcommittee charge as a consideration when you think about your work. Juanita.
Yes, you see what is the way it is stated under subcommittee charge. Recommendations for the full committee on districts and county operations. I just wanna bring to the attention of the group that if we can just be consistent throughout the document that we include on district and council operations, just for consistency throughout the document. And that was my question when I asked about the time and scope of work. Just
Heard. I apologize. Revision 5. Having districts and traveling before council operations in terms of scope or timeline. Can I get either raised hands or head nods or thumbs up or something for folks, from folks? Okay, appreciate you so much. So I will do those revisions. And let's skip, June, if we can, to slide 18. I'm sorry, Juanita, did you have something else?
No. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about what happened. So that was agreed or wasn't agreed that we should have consistency through the document?
It was.
Oh, thank you.
It is revision 5. Thank
you so much.
Yeah, you'll see this all in the meeting summary too. So if we got anything wrong, we can absolutely correct it. So to this section, I'm going to turn it over in a minute, but we just wanted to kind of reground folks in decisions that have been made already by the city or kind of proposed decisions that are out there that we as a team think are pretty relevant to the subcommittee's scope of work. And kind of get us all back on the same page. I know Tate introduced herself earlier. Diana's also here, which are transition team members you all have met before, who are kind of leading in this space. And I'll turn it over to them to share this work.
Thank you, Julia. And Diana, I got to introduce myself, but did you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. See, gotta get my microphone going there. Diana Shiplet, I use she, her pronouns. I am a project coordinator with the transition team. Nice to meet you all. If I haven't met you before, thank you.
Thanks, Diana. June, go to the next slide, please. All right, so I don't have a formal presentation. I'm just gonna walk through these slides and really want to make the space for this to be more of a two-way conversation and discussion. So this slide overviews kind of relevant decisions and proposals that have been made. Slides later on are going to go into more detail, but just briefly, you're all really familiar with the Code 3.02 Council Organization and Procedures revisions that City Council approved in September. And then more recently, City Council approved an amended city organizational structure, which has some overlap with the council operations discussion. Part of that overlap is the staffing recommendation within the limitations we were given to support the new council as well as the new mayor. And then you all know our amazing facilities colleagues that have come and talked to you about their work. And so they have made a number of recommendations related to facilities, some of which have been approved and are moving forward, some of which are still under debate and discussion, and the new sort of more immediate focus on district offices, which I know you're all really interested in. So go to the next slide, please, June. The next slides are just, you've seen them before. It's just a reminder in terms of the updates to City Code 3.02 Council Organization and Procedure. We took a phased approach, largely due to capacity, but also due to the fact that we knew a lot of decisions would be made in the future, and we were trying to line things up as more things became clearer. And so we focused on code revisions that were required to align with the amended charter, and then also just provide a foundation for the new council to operate starting 2025. But now we are starting on phase 2, and that's really exciting. And we're looking forward to this subcommittee's work with that will try to line up with internal work as well. Next slide, please. And so this is just a reminder of what changed in City Code 3.02. Our city attorney's office really used the opportunity to reorganize that code to become clearer and more accessible. Through the process, we also identified kind of key policy choices that came up as we were aligning it to the revised charter. And we've discussed all those previously with this group and the wider public. And it's just a reminder of those key policy choice areas that were under discussion to influence those initial code revisions. Next slide, please. And then this is also a repeat slide from the council presentation and maybe presentations that we gave to you as well, on what we were thinking as potential focus areas for these phase 2 recommendations to the 2025 council. And I think more and more of the focus is really on committees, and really interested in that process. And so, as I think we've all kind of discussed, this is kind of up for some evolution, but just acknowledging that we'll also be making these within some real kind of budget constraints and capacity constraints. Next slide, please. And so here is, I said we'd go back to some of the decisions that had already been made. Here is the organizational chart for staffing to support the elected officials, especially council and the mayor. We were originally charged with making a proposal that was level funded, which what that means is we have these current appropriation levels that are decided upon about this time of the year for the next fiscal year's budget. And so we were asked to provide a staffing recommendation that was equivalent to what is currently provided for our mayor and the 4 other commissioners. So that was interesting to look at expanding council to 12 members. And so through that work, as we've spoken to you about before, we looked at our peer cities, and we knew that we wanted to look at, or we were going to be limited to 2 at most staff per counselor. And so we thought, okay, well, this is a good start. Looking at the various services, we really thought, constituent relations would really be a priority for that dedicated staff. And we were really inspired by models at other cities. I think it started with the city of Minneapolis when we talked to them about how they supported committees and legislative work. They had shared staff to support that work. And we found that really appealing, given that staff would be more permanent and wouldn't change over with every election cycle. So that's a model we've continued to pursue, and we found many other cities that have it. And so it worked out also, given our limits to how much funding we had for staffing, at least initially. So we see this as a start, and then the new council and future councils can build upon this as they see fit. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, I think you skipped one there. So this is, I think this is the latest version of the city organization chart that incorporates the amendments that were made in the council hearing. And, I won't go into detail about it now, but you can see that there's a council operations group that reports right now. It looks like it reports to the assistant city administrator. So that is that group that we saw on the previous slide in the grayed out area. So we heard some great testimony in the in the hearing about concern about separation between the legislative and the executive in this work. So I will say we are exploring the feasibility of having that council operations group report to the council president. We just need to make sure that we can do that and still align with charter and other sort of legal considerations that we have to consider. So we're exploring those options right now. Next slide, please. And then I just have a few renderings here. I think when we put this together, we're like, oh, facilities updates. We were just sort of waiting to see when that next council touch point would be. But I do have like 3 renderings here of the renovated council chambers to support a 12-member council. I think we're all really excited about this. And, you know, this is one thing that has been approved and everyone is agreeing on. Some of you might have seen that there's communications out there that council will be doing virtual meetings very soon until the rest of the year, so they can make their shift to their temporary chambers at the 1900 building. And so that's going to allow everyone to move forward. So in this rendering, you can see the entrance to council. Next slide, please. And that entrance to council creates a little, it's bumped out a little from what it is now. So it creates a little more space for this expanded dais. So here is a view as if you are on council looking out into the audience. And then next slide, please. And then here's a view as if you are in the audience. We're going to have an expanded testimony table, which I think everyone is really excited about. It's also going to be movable. So there's just going to be a lot more ability to be flexible in that room. Okay. Next slide, please. And I think that I can pause there before we go into this next section. Does anyone have any particular questions right now? I think I talk more about onboarding in the next section. Harry.
Thanks for that. And that was helpful. I guess my question is, given the decisions that have been made and maybe this is just me, but I don't think so, what will need to occur before January 2025, which might come out of our recommendations in September of 2024. Are our recommendations going to be limited by the decisions that are already made? For example, our staffing recommendations limited to the staffing structure that was adopted last week. Is code 3.02 as adopted a month ago, that's fixed in place until January 2025, and any changes or alternatives that we come up with have to wait till January. Is that the thinking on that? Or should we be more holistic and think that those might be subject to change?
I think I'm going to have a little bit of a nuanced answer. I think it's a great question, Terry. Certain things like the code 3.02 adoption and like having council meetings start according to that, I think we want to let them get started and get their feet under them. But your recommendations are going to the new council. And so I do think, acknowledging that they are recommendations, you should kind of cast a wide net. I think especially when it comes to things like staffing, make recommendations that you think are appropriate with the understanding that there might be like a phased way for the new councils to respond to those, right? And so I think you can think broadly about the recommendations, but just acknowledging that we don't want to shake too many things up, especially early on. And then the other thing I wanted to note about it is we have, you know, an internal team also looking at all these questions. And I want to make sure that that's kind of an iterative process. So we don't just have two groups going full steam ahead on separate paths. And so I think I want to be really transparent about that I'm hoping that both internal and external recommendations are feeding into each other. And sometimes there may be disagreement and we can acknowledge that. But I think it's gonna be a beneficial process for all of us if there's some coordination of that work, and Diana and myself can take it upon ourselves to help navigate that process for all of us. Does that make sense? Is that it, Terry? Did I answer your questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and we'll have to work through it. But
Yeah.
As we've talked between ourselves and testimony that I've already given, this is nowhere near enough. And you look at the peer cities, it's nowhere near enough. And there's so much work that we're going to dump on the new council unless we get ahead of it a little bit.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my concern.
No, I hear you. Yes, I wish I could I wish I had the money to give to have more staffing. All right, Juliet, are you next?
Yes, probably. So this is me back to worrying about how these meetings are going to run and running long and sucking up a bunch of staff time with the new crowd. So, and I didn't, some cities have time limits on how long counselors can speak. Some of them are just across the board. Some depend on if they're introducing an item and so forth. Was that and I didn't see any time limits in 3.02. Is that something that you discussed or considered or might be appropriate for the new council?
Diana, do you want to take this one?
We certainly thought about it a little bit, but I think that's all part of what we're hoping would be in a recommendation document from you. Most of those sorts of things wind up in council rules documents. And so that is part of the work we're hoping from this subcommittee to outline, you know, whether or not limits are necessary, whether or not limits are necessary for public and committee members. That's all part of what we want to talk about with you and work through with you.
Thank you.
Amy.
I can say this quickly, but something that stood out from what you were just saying was the idea about having a single staff member that's kind of a consistent like constituent relations person and kind of prescribing that to elected officials. As somebody, like, I've worked for several different types of elected officials, and every single person runs the office completely differently. Some people allocate time to constituents. Some people are like, you're only doing legislative research and it's completely dependent on the person. So I would just thinking, or just like what was coming to my mind is like proposing to them different office structures, you know, instead of saying you have to do it this way. Maybe it looks more like saying, legislator A has their staff set up like this, legislator B, so folks can find themselves like more reflected in ways of working. Because I can just like, I'm just imagining if like any boss I had saw that, they would just be like, I'm not doing that. And so just thinking about how legislators would think about these recommendations.
Totally. Thank you for that, Amy. I think it's a great comment. And I might have been a little overly specific in my words, just thinking that we know constituent relations is really important and thinking about this. And I do have a concern about staff capacity for that. And we're looking at how 311 can help as well. But I think you're absolutely right. And we've heard that from others. And when creating the classifications for the council aides, we made them really general, knowing that each counselor might have different needs. Some might be more focused on communications. Some might want their dedicated staff to be more policy focused. So totally agree. And that's a great suggestion. Thank you. All right. if that's everything, I guess we'll keep moving forward. Okay, I'm looking at this. So this is, I don't know, Julia, if you want to take this. I mean, this is when we were thinking about what the subcommittee would be focused on. And I think we've heard some comments about this already. We're really looking towards your expertise to help us think about the committees and the legislative process and help develop those recommendations to the new counselors as we've discussed. And I know you're all many of you are very interested in district offices, which is something we will have our facilities colleagues try to attend some of these. I know they're really interested in talking to you more about that. I did want to note in terms of some specifics on facilities, district offices currently are not funded. So that's something that needs to be considered for the upcoming budget process, because funding would need to be found for those district offices. And so I think in terms of there being a lack of a facilities conversation in the timeline, I think that is a touch point with council that they'd really, appreciate GTAC's thoughts on that, as well as maybe others in the public. I think completely support the values of what district offices will bring, or what they will support, and also what they will provide with more connection between the communities and the elected officials. But there will be trade-offs that we need to consider in terms of costs. So really interested in being transparent about that. And then for onboarding, I will say that timeline is coming at us really quickly. And so that's why tried to be a little more specific with I guess what we need, what we're really interested in hearing about that, but also want to be really transparent about our abilities to respond. We need to get together a budget request related to onboarding like within the next month. And so I am advocating for flexibility, but also that's going to challenge us on how much we can do. Getting together a really diverse set of staff members across the city that are currently involved in transitions of elected officials somehow, and trying to learn from them and understand fully what's done now, what needs to be adapted for the new form of government, and what we really want to add to that to help promote kind of a culture of good governance, a culture of collaboration, help people, the new electeds really understand their roles and responsibilities. So we have a lot of aspirations for that I hope we can meet, but I want to be really clear about how fast that timeline is moving, and how it might be more about us presenting to you what the current thinking is, and you helping identify what might be missing, or like really good innovative ideas or suggestions that you have. Juliet.
So I have to say I haven't paid too much attention to this topic of candidate training, but is any of the onboarding substance going to be discussed in that training? Is there any way we can save ourselves some trouble, or pay it forward by incorporating onboarding in that time?
Yeah, so the city elections office is leading the candidate training, and they have a lot of things in their scope that they need to go through for that, but we are coordinating. So the roles and responsibilities conversation is happening there. So we can definitely try to do that, and I'm participating. The first workshops for that are happening in January, and I'm going to be participating in those, and maybe Diana as well, if I can convince her. So there's definite coordination happening there. Thank you. Terry.
So understanding that, there's a budget involved and that organizing, but is the curriculum already being set for the onboarding, or what's the deadline for that and input to that? And then once the curriculum is set, then how that gets presented, is it,
Mhm.
that's not till spring, is it?
Well, yes, no. We've started kind of our brainstorming internally, our curriculum, and because I'm after Wednesday, I'm taking like 2.5 weeks off, which is crazy to me. And so like I'm gonna be sharing like, oh, this is what we're thinking to like the internal group to understand like who's already doing this work and different things like that. So I think in December, after we've gotten solid feedback on that, we could share that with this group as well. And that's the kind of time, because we do want to start understanding that. I've always thought, oh, we'll have a onboarding planned by spring so we can start preparing for that. But I'm getting pressured from my supervisor, like, who wants an onboarding plan immediately? So I'm sort of like, I'm a little uncertain of that timeline myself, but I'm really interested in this group's feedback on it. But just also acknowledging, we have internal folks that kind of feel ownership over these things as well. So it will be important to coordinate with them.
Real quick, who is the internal folks that we're talking about?
So I'm thinking like, city attorney's office, the auditor's office, who both of those groups, have a certain amount of authority over some of the topics that you would have in onboarding. I'm thinking of our facilities folks. We have a financial analyst that currently oversees a lot of the council transition. So a bunch of the people that are also just like players and making things happen when we transition to elected officials or are involved in training. So those are just some examples. And I'm happy to share that broad list once we have it like firmed up. Juanita. Oh, you're muted.
Can you share with us what you are already doing for onboarding every time you have a new city council? I know that there are only 4, but I mean, I'm sure you have some onboarding.
Mm-hmm. And
Can you share that with us?
Yes, well, and of course, I've not been in charge of it in the past, so I want to be honest
Whoever
about
is,
that.
yeah. Okay.
And I do think June, if you can go 2 slides ahead, I think we have some of the topics that we're thinking about. But I know that right now there are a certain amount of legal trainings that happen. I think how onboarding has happened in the past has been bringing in bureaus a lot to explain what they do and their needs. And this will be different, right? Because coming in, these electeds won't be in charge of bureaus per se. They'll be more in charge of policy. So anyways, we assume in this new form, and maybe this should have happened a lot more. I don't know how much they talked about roles and responsibilities in past onboardings, but we know that's going to be a huge focus of this. We want everyone to understand the roles of the council clerk. I have a longer list that also talks about economic forecasting, the role of the city economist, the debt manager. Like, there's a big list. So we need to figure out what happens in between the election in January. And then we're also thinking 3 to 6 months beyond January. What are the work sessions we can build in to really dig more deeply? Because I don't think us trying to cram everything in November, December is going to be super successful. So we're trying to be really strategic about that. Going back to your original question, I was a little more involved in the onboarding for Commissioner Gonzalez, and our unified communications team, which was still pretty new at that time, took a big role. They created a nice packet for that group, and then had them meeting with different city staff on kind of key policy areas and priorities. And so I think that was a good model, and we'll replicate some of those things, but just adapted to the kind of the system.
Yeah, thank you. One of my concerns is that we're going to have a much larger group of people working together. And I think it's important that all of these things that you have in the list, and in addition, the things that you are talking about, those is really technical information that they need to know, because it's the other way they can function. However, functioning as a group is a different issue. And I think it would be important to do some things like team building, some strategic planning for themselves as to what are their goals in terms of what they see. You know, you can get somebody, there's some really good facilitators on strategic planning that they can look into the situation of the city. What are the goals for the next, the years that are going to be in the city council, so they can start bringing their own, you know, kind of ideas together and getting to know each other through that process, because that is going to facilitate their work. And so to me, that is the most important piece. The technical piece, the staff will be there and they will be able to do advisory and help them whenever they don't understand, you know, whatever, something from any of the departments. But for facilitating the working of them as a group that is functional and that they're able to communicate effectively and they're able to negotiate, those are the things that I think are going to be most critical at all.
Thank you, Juanita. That's amazing. Yeah, definitely agree with you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I wrote it down. It'll go in the requested budget. Leah, go ahead.
Thank you. Juanita, you and I are like very much same page there. I think a lot of the same thoughts, and it speaks to something that Juliet had brought up before about like, how does a group of 12 work together? And instead of assuming that they'll be able to figure it out, I think it would be good to front load with that information and onboarding about how those processes can work with a big group. Because like Juanita said, there are people who know how to teach it. I think one other thing with onboarding that I'd be interested in, if it could fit, is I think this is specific to this like first class, you know, of the new people, is how can GTAC provide information on the engagement that we've been doing? Because all of us are receiving so much information about what people expect out of this new council and also what their questions are. And I would love it if we could get that information to the new people as they're coming in. So just because we have this whole wealth of information, I want to make sure that they get it too, because I'm sure they're going to be getting pieces of it as they're campaigning, but we're getting hopefully this broad look at it across all 4 districts.
Thank you for that. And it kind of harkens back to, I don't know if it was Amy that said like how, like, can we also participate in the onboarding process, which, you know, honestly, I have to admit, I think I had thought about in the past, but might have gotten lost in everything else. And I love being reminded of that, because I think that could be a really amazing opportunity. Because one challenge the city has always had is capacity for helping onboard new elected officials. And so it does seem like it makes a lot of sense. So I'd love to continue to talk about that. Thank you. And this is great that we're focusing on this conversation right now, because I have to be honest, like with this crazy transition project, like this is really relevant right now. And it's really helpful for me to hear these things about onboarding at this moment. So I know, Julia, I know we have more slides, but I just want to did everyone get to say what they wanted to say on this topic?
I do think we can obviously take questions off, you know, outside of this meeting, and we can get answers for you. I think we should move on to next steps, because I want us to come to agreement about kind of what folks are willing to take on after this meeting, before our next meeting. Thanks.
That's great. All right, so next steps. If you go to the next slide, June, I think it's a list of cities that we've really been referencing most frequently thus far as kind of peer cities, and especially Diana through all the amazing research that she's been doing. And then the next slide talks about data collected to date, which I won't read off to you. I know you all have this, and you've also probably all started to look at some of the links that Diana sent. And so that's really what we have now. And then the next slide talks about what we see as key data that's missing. And I think we saw this as really a key place to pause and and really open to if you as a group want to volunteer for different pieces of this that you're interested and use this time to discuss that. I think that could be really useful. And also, Diana, if you wanted to add anything, please feel free to interrupt me.
Nothing to add. I mean, I will say my information is based largely on what can be found on people's websites and what I can read in the giant budget books from different cities. And then we've had a few one-on-one meetings with like Atlanta and Minneapolis and a few others. Anyhow, so it's a little mishmashy at this point in time, and we'd love to have you continue to help fill out what we're missing.
Harry, go ahead.
I mean, just real quick, the one that caught my attention was staffing. And I know exchanged emails with Diana this morning that you have that data on staffing, and make sure that everyone knows that. And thanks for pulling that out.
Yeah, I've added it to the folder so people can now access my random spreadsheet of staffing provided for council members.
Great, thank you. Juliet.
I had a note to myself that I only now now understand. And I said that some missing data were about meeting mechanics to optimize meeting time, because time is money. And when you have a lot of staff here, I mean, it just really gets expensive. And the more longer your minutes are, however, you're keeping your public records, all of that, it's kind of not really hidden costs, but maybe not that evident to the public. And I have started watching some comparable committee sessions, and some of them have equipment. And I know I'm digressing a little bit, but like, for example, I was watching Chicago, I think, and that mayor was using a speaker queue just to keep track of who had their hand raised and stuff. I mean, with 5, it's one thing, but with 12. So I'm wondering if there's some equipment that would be helpful or necessary to keep things in order. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Julia. I think those are the key considerations sometimes you don't catch up on until you actually watch the videos. And I think that's really important. We've also had our city attorney's office kind of caution us against like unlimited public testimony, citing examples in places like Oakland, I believe, where they had Beaverton, more local. They had kind of like racist robocalls that just went on for hours and council couldn't do anything about it. And anyways, so that's a terrible example, but like what is striking that balance of really providing an opportunity for public testimony, really productive public testimony, but not allowing things to go off the rails like that. So really appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Julia, keep me on track. What should I be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna probably be pushy, but I mean, I'll take volunteers. I mean, I think, if it's not clear, we as staff could use your help and your capacity on some of these missing data pieces. So what we're hoping to get is volunteers. And I guess, I mean, my brain goes a couple of places. I'm sure others may go other places. I think if folks had particular interests, like I'm super interested in number 3, and I would just want to go and watch some, committee meetings from some of the cities on the previous slide and come back to the group and share out about that. Or alternatively, maybe you're just interested in a city. I'm really interested in Baltimore, and I want to answer questions 1 through 6 about Baltimore. But I guess we're trying to assess, and you probably have 3 weeks or something for this first set. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of what folks are willing or interested in committing to. Leah.
Thanks. I just want to respond to what you said. I'm super interested in 5, and I want to encourage Juanita to be interested in it with me now.
Okay, I hear Leah, and who then volunteered Juanita to help with number 5. Amy, go ahead.
I'm also interested in number 5, helping with onboarding information. And I would also be happy to do two things. One, make the connection with San Francisco. I worked in the San Francisco legislature and they also have 11 members, so happy to do some research there. And then watching other committee sessions, I'm happy to do that too. And if there's other cities that you want specific research on, happy to help with that research.
Thank you. Juliet.
I'll sign up for 3 and 6.
So I do see some folks. Amy, did you have something else? Okay. Zach, go ahead. And I do see that folks are kind of signing up for things in the chat, which I appreciate. Please continue to do that. If we see overlap between folks, we can make those connections. Zach, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think similar to Amy, I have connections at different cities. And so taking it from the approach of looking at 1 through 6 at a couple of those cities would probably be most effective for me. And I can do that for some of them that are listed, but also primarily with a couple of others that are in Washington State.
Yeah, I think that's great. And let's just make sure we know what they are ahead of time so we don't have different subcommittee members reaching out to the same jurisdiction. Excellent. Yes, Juanita, you were assigned. Thank you for being willing to do it. So we will circle back and just kind of follow up with everybody who has volunteered for something. If you volunteered for the same thing as someone else, we'll make that connection. Any questions, concerns along the way, like we're here to help. It's not just kind of send you out. But I do think we're just going to be able to do this work faster and better with a lot of your brains contributing. Anything else on that? Okay. Can we skip to slide 38? And thank you so much for volunteering. It really is helpful for us. So just really quick, well, we are live streaming this meeting, but I'll also post the recording on the transition website when we're done. We don't have our second meeting scheduled. I am hoping that we can get a time on the week of December 11th. So you'll have a few weeks to do your homework. We'll aggregate it and send it out a week before we meet again, so folks have time to digest it. I'll put this all in an email to you, which means we will have your first subcommittee report before we meet again as a subcommittee. It's a strange sentence. So on the December 5th full committee meeting, we will ask this subcommittee to report out, which will probably be sharing that overview document that you all agreed to today, as well as kind of what folks are working on. And so I was hoping I could get 1 or 2 volunteers and to work with me to figure out what needs to go into that subcommittee report to the full committee on December 5th. You could do like a raised Zoom hand or put it in the chat. Juliet, thank you. If someone wants to join Juliet, I'd love to, but we will take one as well. So yeah, I will send out a doodle. Zach, are you volunteering with Juliet? Appreciate you. So I think just please let me know if you are willing to do the first co-chair rotation as soon as we have folks. I think the better we can create some upcoming meeting agendas. Next slide, please. So just finally, this is a reminder of our upcoming schedule. For the remainder of November, we have a full committee meeting in 2 days, this Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. For those of you also on the Voter and Candidate Education and Outreach Subcommittee, they have their second meeting on November 29th. And then again, we reconvene as a full committee December 5th, where we will hear subcommittee reports for the first time. And for folks listening in, all of these meetings that have dates certain are posted on the transition website. And next slide, please. And with that, we are adjourned. I appreciate it. And it's exciting to have this first meeting of the subcommittee. Thank